Let's look at some examples and decide if they are acts of civil disobedience or not. Now, Rosa Parks was a civil rights protester. If you know anything about Rosa Parks, she was famous for refusing to give up her seat on the bus. During the civil rights movement, it would have been legal for white people to tell black people that they need to move from their seat, that they need to move from a certain part of the bus. And when a white person told Rosa Parks that she needed to move, she refused. So let's go through our checklist. Was she fighting for a just cause? Racial equality is certainly a just cause. Making sure that everyone gets equal resources and opportunities and rights, especially based on their race, is definitely a just cause. So even though it seems like a simple thing, well, she could have given up her bus seat, but the fact that she was legally required to makes it unjust, simply because of her race. Our second criteria, not instituting verbal or physical harm. Well, if you know anything about this interaction in history, Rosa Parks did not swear at people as she left the bus. She didn't slash the bus tires as she was being led away. She was, in fact, peaceful. Finally, did she accept the consequences for her actions? Yes, she was actually arrested and went to jail. Many protesters at this time during the civil rights movement went to jail for their actions because it would have been illegal, whatever they were doing, whether it was sitting on a bus that they weren't allowed to be on or sitting in a restaurant they weren't allowed to be in. Think about Martin Luther King Jr. He went to jail many times because he was accepting the consequences for his actions. So Rosa Parks did indeed enact civil disobedience. She was fighting for the just cause of racial equality. She didn't harm people or property as she was enacting these behaviors, and she certainly accepted the consequences for her actions. Let's look at another example, the American Revolution. Now, the American Revolution certainly fought for a just cause. Colonists at this time wanted to break away from England and have their own independent nation. Britain was taking advantage of the colonists and not providing them with equal representation in Parliament. Colonists felt that their voices weren't being heard, that their taxes were unfair for how much representation they got. You may be familiar with the phrase, no taxation without representation. So fighting for freedom from a tyrannical government who's trying to take over your life or interfere in your life, that is certainly fighting for a just cause. Let's look at our second criteria, not instituting verbal or physical harm. Well, if you look at this image that I've picked out, you can see that this soldier is obviously holding a weapon, and I assume he's not yelling, "Good morning!" He's going into war. Of course, he is probably verbally harming the people that he's coming in contact with, and it's a war. He's certainly physically harming the people that he's coming in contact with. So there was a lot of destruction of property. There's a lot of destruction of life that went along with the American Revolution. So the second criteria does not meet. The third criteria, this one's a little complicated, but consider some of the consequences for the American Revolution. Colonists had to start their brand new government, and that might have been scary for them at the time, of course. They also had to accept the monetary debt that they incurred by spending so much money on this war. They had to accept the loss of life because many colonists lost their lives in this effort. And those are certainly all consequences that they had to deal with. So look at our list altogether. These three items, fighting for a just cause, freedom and representation. Yes, certainly. Not instituting verbal and physical harm, not so much. And accepting consequences, yes. Now, this is not an act of civil disobedience. It's important to note that sometimes in history, people decide we need to move beyond civil disobedience. In fact, in a speech where the colonists were trying to bargain with Britain, they said, you know what, we've asked and we've begged for years and years, and now is the time to fight. So I certainly am not saying the American Revolution was not worth fighting. The colonists decided this is the next move we have to take. But it's important to understand what is an act of civil disobedience and what is not. For an act to be civil disobedience, it needs to meet all three of these criteria. Now, on your own, you'll look at some different scenarios, and decide if you believe there's civil disobedience or not based on these three criteria.